Welcome back to the NAAC Conversation. My name is Ted Seelheimer from the University of Houston, and on behalf of the NAAC Rules Education Committee. You know, every month the goal is to try and talk to folks that are kind of leaders in the industry about topics that are timely, but also timeless. One of the things I kind of wanted to shift gears with today is talk about something that's a little bit more time sensitive. Quite frankly, that's the upcoming D1 Council meeting. And actually no better person to talk to about it than Maggie McKinley from the University of Cincinnati. Not only is she the executive senior associate AD and SWA there at UC, but she's also a member of that committee. So Maggie, thank you for taking the time to join us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Ted. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to the NAAC membership.
Well, one of the things I think that we talked about before is we'll start at a high level and kind of talk about what the council is generally for folks who don't know. And quite frankly, I didn't spend a lot of time learning about it before the last year or two, and then get a little bit more granular into what's happening this week. So if you could share with us just kind of a little bit of the 20,000 foot view about what the council is, and then what your role is on the council.
Yeah, absolutely. So the council is made up of 40 members, 32 of which represent each of the conferences at the Division I level. So you're talking your Autonomy 5, Group of 5, FCS, and Division I institutions. And then there's 8 additional members, including 2 representatives from National SAC, which is great to have the student athletes at the table to provide their perspective as we act on behalf of the membership. So really, we're the body that reviews things at that high level and ultimately casts the vote in terms of whether it's a legislative proposal, which is what we would probably be doing in a normal cycle, April. But right now, what we're doing is really acting on behalf of the membership to keep us moving forward during these times and act on whether it's legislation, waivers, directives, guidelines, you name it. That's what we've been dealing with lately. So council is there as kind of that overarching body that has, I think it's, get this right, 8 committees that report up through it, kind of help us in terms of formulating our positions and how we're going to act moving forward. Right.
Well, one of the things that obviously the council, maybe I'm off base on this, but has obviously grown in kind of importance, but also visibility over the last year as you guys have been required to take a lot more actions to be a lot more nimble. Can you talk a little bit about what has changed in terms of how the council acts or what their role is, and then possibly how the expectations, the attention that's being paid to it have changed how you guys operate?
Yeah, I'd say previous to March 30th, we traditionally met via video conference in August of each year and then had in-person meetings in October, January, April, and June. And April was I'll call it our big meeting, because when we would normally vote on proposals that were in the legislative cycle. March 30th changed everything about the frequency of which we met and how we meet. So we started meeting monthly, if not more frequently, because we needed to start shifting our focus to what was happening in the now and how the pandemic was impacting our campuses and our programs. And so there was a huge shift in our thinking. And we thought, honestly, when we started those first couple meetings, this would be just a couple months worth of things and we would return to quote unquote normal. Meet in person in June, get back to our October meetings. But we quickly realized this wasn't a short-term piece and that every month we were examining similar issues. The recruiting calendar is a great example. We didn't know when in-person recruiting would be able to start back up, what it looked like for our coaches to go off campus. So every month that was an agenda item that we were examining in real time, until the point where we started to feel like we could start making those decisions a few months out. Hey, we kind of can tell from this point to this point, we don't foresee, based upon the medical reports we're receiving from Dr. Hainline, we don't foresee the reports we're receiving from our local health officials. We don't see something significantly changing that would impact a month-to-month decision versus maybe a 3 or 4 month decision. So those are some of the examples of things that we were looking at, as well as the Championship Oversight Committee. They were really charged at, what do our championships and our sports seasons look like? I mean, they were meeting, I would say, weekly. in between meetings to provide us information and to ensure that we were holding our sporting events in a safe manner and where our student athletes had really an opportunity to participate as we moved forward in this. So we as a council made a decision based upon a recommendation to put a moratorium on the legislative cycle in 2021, because we really felt that if the issues that we needed to look at and concentrate on as a membership were, now I'm going to paraphrase this very simply, if it wasn't name, image, likeness, if it wasn't transfer legislation, and if it wasn't something that was a direct result of the pandemic, it didn't rise enough to the importance of keeping our attention.
Sure.
And so it's been a huge shift, is frequency and volume of work and trying to make decisions, in real time as we get to the table.
Yeah.
And I think that's been a big importance of all those meetings that have occurred between the lines. So the committees that report up to council have been kind of convening on a much more regular basis to address those things that just some of them are unanticipated consequences, and to get ahead of it.
Do you foresee, because you guys have had to meet so much more frequently, that now there may be a desire for you guys, the council, to continue to do that into the future instead of being on a more month or multiple month basis to try and address other things that pop up that aren't pandemic related?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ted. I think that the other thing that we've also learned is there's the opportunity to meet virtually to increase that frequency. And as someone who's rolling off council at the end of June, my fellow council members might be like, I can't believe Maggie's saying this, but yeah, I do think there's a lot of value in a little bit more frequency of meetings so that you can kind of tackle things in pieces versus, 2-day long, morning till night meetings where you might be able to kind of break things up. Here's some things that might be more time sensitive that there's value in meeting as a council versus putting it all into, 3 months later, we're going to kind of sit around and talk about this item.
Right.
The role of the Council Coordination Committee, 3C, which I sit on, was that body that would help act on behalf of council in between meetings, and it's weekly. We've done a lot of work on a weekly basis, but I think with that monthly, could be every other month, there's a lot of value in that, and it really helps keep things progressing forward so that decisions can be made and information can be communicated to the membership in a timely manner so compliance people can plan and put things into, whether it's updates to policies or procedures or just kind of, the way you're thinking about things, you have an opportunity to kind of get out ahead of it a little bit more and put it into place for when it actually goes into effect.
Right. I think the transfer discussion and NIL are obviously the two perfect examples of that. One, obviously, we're hoping to see more concrete answers on soon, but I mean, even over the last month or two, shoot, let's just talk about the end of basketball season. That gets a lot of attention, and rightfully so, but we're having to operate with we think this is what we think, but without those definite answers, then there's a whole lot of other information that's being shared, and they're not necessarily wrong or off base in terms of the rationale, but it's not based in anything that we can say, okay, this is where we're actually operating when it comes to handling these transfer situations. So, well, you mentioned that you're rolling off a committee, so maybe you're more free to answer this question in terms of anything that, on one side that you want people to know about how the council that they may not already know, or perhaps are there any particularly interesting or contentious decisions you guys have had to approach that have led to some lively discussions?
Yeah, I think on the interesting part, I think it's, the volume of information and the amount of materials that the council members are responsible for reviewing prior to the meetings. I find great value in, those being, I'll call them public documents within the NCAA membership and being able to get input. I think our conference office in particular does a great job of gathering feedback from our senior compliance people on campus and saying, here's the sentiment on our campus and here's how we'd vote and why.
Mhm.
And it helps me when I come to the table and we have discussion on the floor, because it's, 9 times out of 10, when there is something up for vote, there's going to be some robust discussion around the table, and you're going to hear different inputs, and it could potentially change maybe the position on the floor or solidify that, yeah, that's exactly what I'm hearing from my conference. So I think that the really important piece is that when council members come to the table, they're coming prepared, and they're also ready to act if something changes on the floor.
Right.
It's not always as it appears in the packet. And so council members have to be equipped to be able to think on their feet and assess, okay, well, I came in and my position was based upon it looking like A, B, and C. And now all of a sudden up on the slide, it's X, Y, and Z because someone kind of made a motion on the floor to say, I like this, but I think this is a better way to do it.
Right.
And that is what the council really is charged with, is coming forward and saying, yeah, we've looked at it all this way, but I think for the membership and for the betterment of Division I, this is the way to go. And then council has to get that it's the old school clicker system, and you're voting on the floor and you see the vote go up, and that's where you go with it. So I think that's one thing that I think is really important, is everyone in the membership has an opportunity to weigh in if you take the time to review the materials. And there's a lot of things in there. I would highly encourage people to read those standing committee reports. The Football Oversight Committee, Men's Basketball Oversight Committee, SAEC, because you really see what they're talking about in real time and what direction they might be headed.
Right.
You can then be such a service to your coaches, because you're almost giving them, I'll call it inside information. They're not getting that from many other sources. No. And you then get to give them accurate information, not what they're hearing, through a third party or seeing on social media. There's a lot of inaccurate information floating out there. Mm-hmm. And it helps in your relationship with those coaches of, this is really what they're talking about. This is what they're looking at maybe doing. What are your thoughts on this? Hey, I can get this to a person who sits on that committee so we can get them feedback.
Right.
And I really think that's something that I'd love the membership to know and take more advantage of. Contentious conversations, they're very healthy. A lot of people are coming from different experiences, right, and tell what's fresh, what's a fresh wound with someone, and what might be an experience they had. I think one of those conversations that really sparks something that's going to be positive is the formation of the infractions process committee. So out of a conversation of council a few months ago, we were listening to a presentation about some of the new pieces of the structure, and it brought up a lot of questions or a lot of concerns or points of angst with the membership. Right. And this committee was formed. So there are, I believe it's 5 presidents at the direction of the board of directors serving on this committee. I'm on the committee. Greg Sankey is on the committee. And then the FAR at Utah is on the committee, kind of as people in the membership with experience. We're non-voting members, but we get to provide insight into this. So we're really doing a deep dive into that process. And it's been very, I would say it's eye-opening. And I think it's going to be very beneficial to the membership as we can talk through, here's our pain points. How do we get to the process to be what the membership really wants it to be?
Right. Well, you segue perfectly into my next question, kind of about that, campus perspective, but more specifically the compliance perspective. When I was going through the list of folks that are current members of council, I counted you as one of 2 that has compliance as a kind of a daily responsibility. Not that all of the ADs and presidents don't have that, but they have a lot of other things that aren't just compliance. And so this being a NAAC conversation, the compliance perspective obviously is important to us. Is there a way that compliance and the real world practical applications of how these are going to play out on campus and be monitored, enforced, and educated how is that considered in y'all's discussions, and how are you and the other members able to bring that practical compliance perspective to the debates that are happening?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that the realization a couple years ago really hit home. So I chair the legislative committee. So that's one of the committees that reports up to council. And 3C did not have a member of the legislative committee on it. So 3C, again, the body that's acting weekly to make decisions on behalf of council, didn't have someone who literally was that practitioner or kind of had that application of thought day to day. So I actually approached some NCAA staff members and our council chair, Grace Calhoun, and said, hey, I think it would be of value to have a member of the legislative committee. I'm not advocating for me necessarily, but someone on council who's on the legislative committee who can, during those course of those meetings, talk about what is the effect of this? What's the application? What really, how does this really impact campus?
Right.
And so Grace was like, I think you're absolutely right. And so that's how I became a member of 3C. Be careful what you ask for.
Right.
But I am looked to, and I will give Grace Calhoun a lot of credit as our chair of council. She makes an intentional effort to look to me during council meetings and say, Maggie, what is the perspective of the legislative committee? What is the position of the legislative committee? There's a very intentional effort at the council meetings to get the legislative committee's perspective on that. What's the application? What might be the unintended consequences? Are we okay with some of those consequences? Because we have to understand, like, not everything's going to be perfect. But are those things that we're okay with managing at a campus level, at a conference level, because the good outweighs maybe some of those little bad things. And so I do appreciate that leadership, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak on the floor of council quite frequently now as to how a practitioner might be looking at this.
Right. Well, then let's think about this week as a, obviously there's a lot of discussions being had about what we're going to do with the recruiting dead period heading into the summer, and obviously the transfer rules, whether it be a waiver, legislation. Not to, if you can tell us what's going to happen, that'd be great. Save us 3 days of trying to figure it out. But maybe just generally, like, how are you then, using that as an example, how are you approaching this meeting then to bring that compliance perspective? And is there anything that you would suggest that you're doing there in Cincinnati of how we can be preparing our coaches heading into this, where, it's looking like things are going to happen in these two spaces?
Yeah, it's funny because I have thought I knew how things were going to go going into a council meeting, had it all prepared, everything ready to go out to my coaches, gave them, just a little bit of a sneak preview going into a head coaches meeting. Come out of the meeting, I'm like, never mind. It went the opposite way. So it's a little bit hard. And what I've learned, you got to couch things like what we anticipate. Now, what happens on the floor could go the complete opposite way. I do believe that we will, knock on wood, I do believe we will come out of this meeting with two big decisions on the transfer proposal, as well as the recruiting calendars and what that will look like as we come out of it. There are several committees that have done a lot of work in terms of their positions on what that should look like coming out of the recruiting dead period. And it seems like there is a consensus, actually almost a unanimous recommendation of what that should look like. So that would be where I could say I'm going to lean a little bit heavier on the prediction. We're going to go with probably what 1, 2, 3, 4 committees have recommended on paper. On the transfer exception, when we go into a meeting and we have a chart of how procedurally everything is going to go, that's the one piece that you kind of sit back and laugh and go, okay, this seems like it's going to be straightforward, but because there's so many pieces, there's so many ways we could kind of get off track here. But I do believe we will come out of there with a decision kind of owe that to our student athletes at this point. We owe that to our member institutions to know what this is going to look like going forward into the next academic year. We have student athletes who are in the transfer portal who were told by resolution that, hey, we would have in January this uniform transfer exception on the books.
Right.
Obviously, there's some things that are out of our control. But I think we're going to kind of get that over the finish line here soon, whether it's by adopting legislation, whether it's by putting a waiver in effect. We'll get some clarity to the membership moving forward. And I would say it's going to look like what kind of we were told it was going to look like.
Sure.
Just be a matter of whether it's black and white in the manual.
Yeah.
It's that waiver that you have to go try to find and, you know, download and put in a folder somewhere.
Well, as long as they put it in the Q&A, then that's
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm waiting for Q&As to, you know, when we get to Q&As, I always used to joke around that the longer the Q&A, the worse the proposal was written or legislation. Maybe it shouldn't be legislation if you have to have that many ways to explain it. So I think that's one piece that I would say that for compliance professionals to keep their eye on is this modernization of rules subcommittee. It's part of the legislative committee. They're working really hard on taking a look at our legislation and some of these pieces of, you know, is this where we still need to be in 2021? You know, or has going through the last 13 months kind of opened our eyes so ways that maybe we should be operating that way. That waiver that we applied, that flexibility seems to be the better way to do it. And I'll use an example. In the council meeting, we're going to look at one rule change, potential non-controversial emergency piece of legislation would be being able to use digital tickets for prospective student athletes. Right? Sounds hilarious, but we literally have a rule that says it has to be a hard ticket. We're in a day and age where most things are done. We're talking about digital tickets and, you know, the ease and the flow of people into stadiums, and we're still having people sign pass lists and giving them a ticket stub. So those are things, little things, but I think that's just kind of a little bit of a first step into where that committee is going to go. And I think all compliance professionals should give that group a big thanks for the work they're going to do for our membership moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, obviously, for better or worse, we've gotten to try some things out, obviously, over the last year. And, you know, there's some things, I don't know, football phone calls that maybe should be modernized a little bit, but I'm not on council. So,
well, I know if you read the FOC recommendation. But
I did, and I fell asleep because it's, well, if anybody wants to email me directly and ask about my opinions, if you don't already know, feel free. So
the legislative committee has a position on that, so I'll get to that on the floor. I
look forward to hearing about this come Wednesday or Thursday.
we made sure that the slide is G-rated as our position. So
awesome. Well, Maggie, I thank you so much for your time today, and obviously your time, you know, helping everybody out with your role there, trying to bring that compliance perspective throughout the changes we've been dealing with. So again, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ted. Appreciate it.
Well, and this has been another NAAC conversation. Hope everybody's doing well and look forward to talking again next month. Take care.